You tricked me by pressing the mute button, thank you. Hello, how are you all doing? So I'm here to talk about the OWASP ZAP proxy. Couple of quick questions. Has anyone here actually heard of ZAP before? Reasonable, great. And how many of you actually used ZAP? Quite a few of you still, but some of you haven't, and that's good. So this is going to be an introductory talk. So I am the ZAP project lead, or one of the leads. There are 3 of us and 4 of us in the core team now. And so I released ZAP in 2010, I think it was. I'm also on the OWASP project committee, and I'm a distinguished engineer at JIT. So in this talk, I'm going to give an introduction to ZAP. I'm going to talk about the options for using ZAP, when to use it, some key steps, and then I'm going to talk about some of the newer stuff like the automation framework and authentication updates, some new stuff there. Now, if you've got any questions, shout out as we go along. I'd much rather make things clear early on rather than have you confused from the start to the end.
Shout out and let me know and I'll wander around with the mic.
So, what is ZAP? Always a good start. So, ZAP is a tool for finding vulnerabilities in web applications. And in this case, we're really talking about custom web applications. There are certain types of scanners which look for known applications with known vulnerabilities. So you've got, say, a WordPress installation with certain plugins, you detect which version they are and go, these ones have known vulnerabilities, you've got problems. ZAP doesn't really do that. It does find some known vulnerabilities, but really it's looking for the fun stuff, the unknown vulnerabilities. So it's really acting as a manual pen tester. Not a full pen test, I have to, I'm going to make that very clear, but it's still attacking your application in a very similar way. And this means if you have an application that no one's ever seen before, you don't have a tool that goes, oh, it must be fine, there are no known vulnerabilities, because there quite possibly will be some. So it is an OWASP flagship project, so the flagship projects are the ones that are most mature and most recommended for use. And like all OWASP projects, it is completely free and open source. It's also cross-platform, something that's very important to me early on. And so it requires Java 17, and if you've got a box that will run it, it should run ZAP. We've actually got ZAP running on a Raspberry Pi. I wouldn't recommend that for production. It doesn't run particularly fast, but it does run. It is also well maintained, and this is something I like to stress because in the last 13 years or so, I've been tracking all of the open source web scanners that I can ever find. And there are quite a lot of them, and a lot of them come and a lot of them go. So people go, oh, how hard can it be? It's actually very hard. People try them out, create a new one, find out how hard it is, and then it gets abandoned. So there's a lot of scanners out there that are no longer maintained. ZAP is one of the few that's been maintained for a very long time. Not only that, it is, we believe, the world's most popular, most widely used web scanner. That is quite a claim because we're including all the commercial web scanners in that statement as well. I have been saying this on stage at security conferences for many years and no one's disagreed with me, so it must be true. We do have some figures to back this up. So last month there were 3.8 million checked for updates made by ZAP, and those are the ones we know about. It is quite easy to turn these things off in ZAP, but it is on by default. We know it is used by enterprises, large, small, medium, and individuals all around the world. And it is the foundation for a lot of commercial tools. So although ZAP's free, you can pay for it if you want to have online versions, and the company I work for, JIT, is one of those companies that uses ZAP, not too surprisingly. And we've got all of the statistics are publicly available. Well, not all of them, we have a few more, but we've published a whole load and they get updated every month, so you can have a look and check out my claims. So, who is ZAP for? So, when I released ZAP, a long time ago now, I was really aiming it at developers and functional testers. That was my key audience, partly because I was a developer, and I didn't have a cheek to release a tool which was aimed at security folk. And that is still very much a focus for us. So I think it's very important to test applications as early as possible, and that means while you're actually developing them. We do know that a lot of students make use of ZAP, and it's a really great tool for students, partly because it's open source. So you can actually see how it works, and you can have a play around with it, and you can get involved. And on our website, we've got quite a large student hall of fame. We've had loads of students work on ZAP. ZAP is a community project. We want people to get involved, whether you're a security person, a developer, a student, it doesn't matter. If you want to get involved, we all make that easy. And we've got a student hall of fame, which includes all our students who worked on Google Summer of Code, Mozilla Winter Security, and students who've just worked on ZAP in their own, as part of their coursework or whatever. But we do know that a lot of security professionals use ZAP. They probably use other security tools as well, including some well-known ones, but we do know that it's probably, when it comes to manual testing, we think security professionals use ZAP more than any other type of users. When it comes to automation, it's a different matter. So, how often is ZAP released? We do full releases, and we try and do those around 2 a year. We've been fairly reasonable at keeping to that recently. There's a new one. We had the release candidate a few weeks ago. We do need to get it out. It's close. But ZAP has a plugin architecture, and what we're trying to do is get as much of the functionality into add-ons. They're called add-ons, but there's a whole load of key functionality which is actually which is now part of add-ons. So things like the standard spider, the Ajax spider, all these things are actually in add-ons. And one of the reasons we're pushing as much functionality into add-ons, we can update them at any time. We can release new add-ons, we can push out updates. I think someone reported a bug today in the GraphQL add-on, and it was fixed and we pushed out a new version. So we can do those things very quickly. If there's a problem with a core, it's every 2 years unless it's a really serious problem. We also do weekly releases. They're available as zip and Docker images. And we also have a daily Docker image. So you can just download that and play around. And so if you want to see the latest fixes in the core, then you can get it that way. Everyone okay so far? A few nods, good, not need to sleep. So, how can you use ZAP? So, we've got the desktop GUI, and this is a ye olde worldy Java Swing application. But it works, and it allows you to see exactly what's going on. So it's got a lot going on. You'll see it in a bit, but we try and make it easier for people new to ZAP, but there's a lot you can do with it. You don't actually have to use Java because you can run it in Docker, and there's this very clever technology called Web Swing, which we've been allowed to include, which means you can use ZAP in the browser. It translates it into the Swing into the web page, and it works surprisingly well. We have the heads-up display. So this is something which is quite unique, and what it does is it brings ZAP into the browser. So it allows you to focus on your target application, but you can also get information from ZAP, like some of the alerts, you can kick off the spiders, a whole load of things. I have to admit that we've recently pointed out that this is not under active development. We're a small team, and we can't do everything, and we don't have anyone focusing on the HUD yet. Well, the reason we made the announcement was to try and encourage people to get involved. We've got about 3 people who appear to be very interested. So hopefully that will be back under active development before too long. But one of the key ways we know ZAP is used is in automation. And I think it's 2/3 to 1/3 of the ZAP runs we're aware of are automated as opposed to manual. Actually, it might be more than that, but I'll check the figures. And we have lots of options for automating ZAP. We do have a quick start command line option. I really try and push people away from this. It is very simple. You're given a URL, and that's about it. It is very limited, and it's okay for quick demos. Well, not necessarily quick demos, because ZAP scans can take some time. So it's a quick way to get started, but it is not very flexible, and you do need flexibility when you get into these kind of scans. So we also have Docker package scans, and these provide a set of common things we think people want to do. We have a baseline scan, and that does a 1-minute spider. You can do the Ajax spider as well. I'll explain those things to terms later. And then all it does is passive scanning. So we're not actually attacking anything. Why would you do that? Because it's quite quick. It only takes a couple of minutes to run. So it's something you can do in CI/CD. So it's something I put in place when I was at Mozilla, and it meant that on pull requests we could actually still do some checks, and we could check that things like You've got all the security headers there, you've put the right flags on cookies, those kind of things. We have an API scan, so you've got an API definition, then you can specify that, and we've got the full scan as well. These have quite a few options, but it's still not as much as you can do via desktop. We have GitHub Actions, which do the same thing. It's got the same 3 sets of GitHub Actions as the package scans. And then we've got the automation framework, and that's something I'm going to talk about a bit more in a bit. And finally, we have the API in daemon mode. So you don't have to use the ZAP desktop UI. You can give it the daemon flag, and then you just control it via the API. And the ZAP API is one of the most powerful in the industry, I believe. You can do nearly everything you can do via the desktop, via the API. There's some exceptions like fuzzing. We see it as very much a manual option. We do plan on adding an API, but haven't got around to it yet. There's a lot to do. So, when should you use that? Not just before a release. This is something that I kind of worked out when I got the pen testers in to do test a service I was releasing 2 weeks' time in 2009. And they found quite a few problems very late in the day. And that is what set me off on this journey. So that failed pen test is the reason why ZAP exists. But yeah, don't think you can get to the stage where we're nearly ready to release, let's start thinking about security. It's way too late. You can test, you can use ZAP when you're playing around with your application, when you're developing it, when you're testing it manually. You can just launch a browser from ZAP and play around with the application. You don't have to understand any of the actual security stuff. ZAP will give you a whole load of alerts, and you can do all the attacking then as well. So it is very useful at this stage. If you're doing a full scan, it can take a significant amount of time. So it could be half an hour, it could be several hours. There are ways to speed things up. But if you've got a very large application with lots of parameters, then it's going to take a while for any tool to do lots of attacks on all the parameters. There are ways around this, but you are just limiting what it does. You can do much more limited scans. So if you actually know that you've changed, a PR has got 3 files been changed, and those 3 files only impact 2 endpoints. If you can work that out, then just tell ZAP to scan those 2 endpoints. It'll do that very quickly. So there are options, and ZAP has got a whole load of things, like you can specify which technologies your application uses. If you know it doesn't use MySQL, then there's no point in ZAP doing SQL injection attacks against MySQL. So if you actually know, we have to assume that ZAP knows nothing about the application. By default, it'll do everything. But if you know it only uses certain technologies, disable the rest in ZAP, and it won't perform those attacks. It'll speed things up. So one of the key things with dynamic application security testing, which is what ZAP does, is how you explore your application. This is absolutely key. If you don't explore your application effectively, then ZAP won't know about the stuff it doesn't know about and won't be able to attack it. So exploring is really important. Manual exploring for a web app designed for users is the best option. You've got somebody there, particularly a pen tester or anyone with QA experience or something, or developer, it doesn't matter. It's just web app designed for humans. Get a human to actually explore it, proxying in a browser through ZAP, and you will help ZAP find all the functionality. This is fine, but it takes a while and requires someone to do it, and isn't very good for automation. Unit tests are great. If you have got unit tests or integration tests which make HTTP, HTTPS requests, then proxy those through ZAP. If you're using ZAP in some sort of attack mode, then yeah, ZAP will mess things up, so your unit tests will probably fail. You want to run the unit tests as unit tests separately, but then you can use them essentially as seeds for ZAP and teach ZAP how to use the application. We can also import things. So API definitions, OpenAPI, Swagger, GraphQL, SOAP, HAR, logs. We try and support a whole load of things so we can import definitions, API definitions or requests into ZAP. Then we have a couple of spiders. We have the traditional spider, and this is standard crawler, so it parses HTML, looks for links, follows them, looks for forms, submits them, does all that kind of stuff. It's fast and furious and really great, except for modern web apps. I hate modern web apps. They are a complete pain. You'll look at, I don't know if you look to the source of a modern web app, usually it's a few lines, which is including a couple of JavaScript libraries, and that's it. So a traditional spider will look at that and go, there's nothing here. That's because, of course, that JavaScript has done a whole load of nastiness in the browser and created your UI. And really the only way to understand that is to use a browser. There is nothing else apart from these days, apart from a browser, that will really be able to understand a modern web app. So we use browsers, and that's what the Ajax spider is. We're using a project called CrawlJax, and that launches browsers using Selenium, and we then control those to explore the application. I'll just grab a quick look. So, the fun part. Once you've explored something, then you can start attacking. Well, you don't actually have to explore it all the time, or all the way through, because ZAP passively scans. So it actually looks at the requests and responses flowing through it. And they could be proxy, they could be when you import, they could be when you're running unit tests, anything, as long as, well, the spiders, as long as ZAP sees that traffic, it looks at it, looks at the requests, looks at the responses, and can find vulnerabilities and potential vulnerabilities. So that's passive scanning. It's difficult to turn off because there's no need really. You can tune it, you can turn off individual rules, but it happens all the time. Active scanning is different. This is where you're actually telling ZAP to attack the application. And I have to stress, you should only attack applications you have permission to attack. So this is on demand. You have to tell ZAP to do some attacking because we don't want you to get in trouble, because we're nice like that. Now, ZAP has an incredibly fine-grained approach. So we've got a whole load of rules. You can switch the rules on and off. The rules have different levels. So you've got high, medium, low, medium, high, and insane strengths. We've got thresholds. We've got configuration within rules. We've got a huge amount of configurations possible. We try and make it as good out of the box as we can, but we get very little feedback from users, so it's very difficult for us to tune it for everyone's requirements. And we have attack mode. And attack mode is similar to the active scan, except it starts attacking as you discover stuff. So this is, instead of doing your full exploring and then attacking, as soon as you start exploring stuff that you have told ZAP is in context, is in scope, then ZAP will start attacking it. And this is quite good if you've got an application and you want to focus, do some manual testing, you want to focus on one particular area of the application. Then you just explore that part of the application and ZAP will only attack what you're looking at. And finally, at this stage anyway, reporting. Obviously, if you're using the desktop UI, then you can look at the alerts in the relevant tab. We have report generation, and for quite a long time, ZAP reports were pretty awful, I have to admit. We do now have a much more flexible report framework. So we're using another open source project, so it's quite easy to create your own templates. We've got a whole load of example templates, and you can include loads of different types of information in your reports, and there's something you want to include, but can't currently, let us know and we'll make it happen. If you're using the GitHub Actions, then they will actually raise issues for you, and they'll keep a check to make sure they don't raise new issues, and they'll actually close ones if the issues are no longer found. And we have a bug tracker add-on as well. How's everyone going? Okay? No questions so far? Okay, so what I'll do now is tell you a bit about the automation framework. So in this particular option, you're controlling ZAP with one YAML file. That's it. We've got there's lots of different ways of configure ZAP by the UI. We've got different config files. It gets confusing. So the automation framework is one YAML file. And one of the reasons we introduced it is because we found the package scans were getting very popular, but people kept on saying, and can you add this feature and this feature? and the package scans are really just command line options, and we could have gone down the curl route of actually having a million options, but ZAP has often has a standard sequence of doing things. You need to explore an application before you can attack it, and it kind of made sense to actually split it up into a series of jobs, and that's what the automation framework does. And you can define a whole set of jobs, and you can repeat jobs, you can have specialized ones, you can do all these kind of things. And the other thing is the package scans are tied to Docker. This is not a technical, it's just how we build them, it's kind of historical. And we've had requests for being able to use this package scans outside of Docker, and that's one of the reasons for the automation framework. So it is not tied to Docker, but you can use it in Docker or any other container you feel like. And it does actually have a GUI option as well for testing, and that actually makes it easier for me to demo. It's demo time.
Sacrifice the goat.
So, blood seeping down here. Right, this is the ZAP desktop. Can everyone see it okay? It's not usually this big on my screen, so just try to make it a bit more visible. And what you'll see is we have the sites tree, which it shows the structure of the application. We've got kind of a place where you look at the question responses, but I'm actually focusing on this automation tab here. And so what you can do is what I'll do first is, 'cause it's actually easier if we just do a quick manual explore. So have a look. I do still use the venerable budget. I will get around to using JUSOC at some point. The trouble is it's a kind of modern web app and takes a lot longer. Is that going to... Don't tell me that failed. No, it's coming up now. Ah, God, don't you hate these things? Well, at least that kind of works, so hopefully now... there we go. Every time you get a new version of Firefox or Chrome, it just breaks things. So this is Budget, very simple app, and I was just doing some quick explore things there. And what you'll see is we now have this kind of structure, which you can't see very well there, and it's really hard to control the mouse with one hand. Or two, it turns out. Anyway, you can see the structure of the application here, and you can see the requests down, the history here, and if you select anything, you'll be able to see the requests and responses. Now, and what you can do from here is you can actually launch all of the kind of attacking tools, you can do all the spidering, and you can do all sorts of fun things. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually include this in a context. And context is something that some people find a bit confusing, but context you can think of as applications or parts of applications. They're whatever you want them to be, really, but usually it's an application. And the reason we have context is so you can associate things with them, because we need some way to associate properties with an application or part of an application. If everything's default, fine, but usually there's other stuff, and you don't want to, if you've got two different applications, you don't want to mix them up, you don't want to get confused. So contexts are very important, and they're strictly speaking, they are just a set of regexes, including things and excluding them. But we can then, once we've got a context, we can associate all sorts of interesting things with them. And because they're so useful, we've kind of made it an integral part of the automation framework. And what we can do is we can create a new automation framework plan. And the reason I did all that was because I can now select the context I want. And these are all of the jobs that we support. So there's a set of jobs, and we've got profiles. So I'm going to go for a baseline scan, and I should have brought my mouse, shouldn't I? can't remember how you right click on here with it. Never mind. No, it's all right. One's mouse. No, we'll just go with this. So what I'm going to do is I will do a baseline scan and I will save that. And I've just remembered, no, it's okay, okay, because what I can do is I can actually go in. I just don't want to use this Ajax spider because it just takes a bit too long for a demo. So I can now remove that one. So you can see all of the jobs down here. And if you actually double click on them, you can see all of the options, and you can show advanced options and all fun things like that. So you can actually set up this automation plan in the desktop GUI. You don't have to. You can write it in, you can use your text editor if you want, but the advantage is you can actually then run it, and you will see that it's now running. It's set up the environment. It's finished running the spider. It is now passive scanning, and it's finished, and it's generated a report. So this is a very simple way of setting up the automation framework, running something. You can see how long it takes. You can see the output you would get from the command line. Nice and straightforward. Now, one thing I don't know if you can see back there is there's a little another thing here, because what I found with experience is if you automate things, how do you know they still work a few weeks later? That's an interesting thing. And I had this at Mozilla, set up an authenticated scan on a particular site. I think it was addons.mozilla.org. And then one day I came in and I got an alert to say the scan had failed, because I'm paranoid about these things and I check everything. So I manually put in some checks to make sure things work. We want to make it easier. So what we have is we have these things called tests, job tests. And this particular case, it's a statistics test, because ZAP maintains a whole load of statistics. And in this particular case, we know there is a statistic that tells you how many URLs the spider found. And by default, we say it should be more than 100. And in this particular case, if we look at the output, it found 135 URLs. 135 is more than 100. It passed. If your application is smaller, you change the stats to be smaller. You can check it doesn't find too many. And there's a huge amount of stats. We publish them on the ZAP website, all the stats that ZAP maintains internally. And we've got stats around authentication as well. So you can check every aspect that you want to make sure. You can add more tests here. So it's very easy to add more tests to test exactly what you want, so you can be sure that ZAP is really doing what you think it's doing. You can do things like, did it find a particular URL? Did it find a particular string on a particular page? You can do all these things to give you that level of confidence that ZAP is still working in the way you want. That was a quick introduction to the automation framework. Any questions about that?
Can you configure it to fail if it's passed a particular test?
I can repeat this. Can you configure it to fail if it fails a particular test? Surprisingly, yes. So let's try this out. What I'll do is say it's got to be more than something big, and I will actually create a new session which gets rid of all this stuff but doesn't get rid of the plan, and we will try running it, and there you'll see it's failed. And actually I think in the environment, so fail on error and fail on warning. So it actually fails you can choose to fail the whole plan, or you can choose it to fail on warning. So yeah, you've got fine grained control over that as well. That's part of the whole idea. So you can just put this in automation and you have that confidence that it's doing what you want. If it's not, you can find out.
How does Spider Ajax work?
How does Spider Ajax work? This is the Crawljax project, which launches browsers. So basically it launches browsers and then clicks on stuff and fills in forms and does all that kind of stuff. So this is our way of handling modern web apps. It works pretty effectively on certain web apps. We know there's certain controls it doesn't work as well on. Modern web apps are a pain. This is something we're working on to improve, but it's always a pain. Okay, so next I was going to have a quick chat about authentication. How am I doing time-wise, by the way? How many haven't checked?
Yeah, we're a little bit over, but
I started later. Sorry, I'll try and do this quickly.
started 10 minutes late. Blame it on me.
Yeah, it's all his fault. So, with authentication, this is where you're getting ZAP to authenticate your application. Why do you want to do it? Well, otherwise, if your application is doing anything interesting, it's going to have authentication. If you don't authenticate, you won't be able to test any of the interesting stuff. You can handle authentication yourself. We've got some environmental variables, so you can say, here is the value that you need to put in the authorization header. If it's not the authorization header, you give us another value to tell us what header is, and you can give another value to check that it only matches certain sites. We have replacer rules, so these are kind of simple way of replacing anything in any request or response. Or we've got scripts, and scripts do whatever you want. And if you do it yourself, you can still ZAP will still help you with verification, which I'll talk about in a bit. But this can be straightforward for certain applications, and it can be a complete pain for other applications. So this works for you, great, but you might want other options. And the other option is configuring ZAP. So ZAP needs to know quite a few things. So it needs to know how to authenticate, and that is how to get from the state of not being logged in to being logged in. It needs credentials, not surprisingly, and it needs to understand session handling, because if it doesn't understand session handling, it won't maintain the session, and you'll have to log in on the very next request. It also needs a verification strategy, and this is how to tell it's still logged in. And this can be a problem because session tokens can time out. We might hit logout functionality, or the application might realise we're doing bad things and kick us out. So there's a lot of cases where we actually need to check that we are still logged in, and if not, log in again. And we, as I've mentioned, we maintain a whole load of statistics to make it easy for you to see whether things actually worked. I want to give another quick demo. And in this case, just a quick walkthrough. I showed you the context before. One of the things you'll see is authentication. So this is how you configure authentication. Manual authentication means you're on your own. As you see, you've got a whole load, and if you select something like HTML, you see HTTP, you see there's lots of things you've got to specify. So it is not straightforward. We have the verification down here. So you can kind of check requests, responses, or you can poll specific URLs. And we have session management and its set of options here. This set of configuration is very effective. It means ZAP can handle most things. If it's possible to automate authentication with your app, ZAP will be able to handle it. But you've got to really understand authentication, session handling, and verification for your app. This is not always straightforward. Maybe you're in the security team, you are not involved with developing the application. Maybe you're a developer and you're using a third-party authentication session handling, and I hope you are. So you might not understand all this stuff, and it gets complicated. So we have tried to make it easy. This is something that's very recent, because if you notice down here, we've got auto-detect session management. And we also have, if we look at the authentication, verification strategy, auto-detect, and we even have auto-detecting authentication. Now, the auto-detecting authentication, I'm not really recommending. It's kind of useful that you'll find out if it finds login forms. But a fun one is another one called browser-based authentication. Because what you'll see is the only thing you have to provide, apart from the credentials which are on the user screen, is the login URL. Okay, you can specify things like which browser and how long to wait. But really, all you need is the URL and the credentials. And then if you use auto-detection for the other things, it should all work. How do we test this? Well, it's actually quite a pain because there aren't very many good examples on the internet. So we've created some. And if we go to, I think it's that one. So we actually have an add-on which is included with ZAP. It's not included in standard ZAP as a development add-on. And we both basically have a whole set of test cases which we're testing with. But the more interesting thing is we also have a tool for you, which is the Authentication Tester. And this means you can actually test these things very quickly for yourself. So as you'll see, I've got the test.com. Pretty sure it's password 123. And turn it off just to show you. And what it will do, it will launch a browser and then it will do stuff for you. And you can see it's logged in. And there you go. And it's a demo, so things have gone wrong. Let me just try that one again. No, didn't want to do that. What I wanted to do was put it in demo mode, because basically that does it actually shows you, it just puts sleeps in so you can see it actually filling things out. So what Zap will try and do with browser-based authentication, it will try and actually identify the pages, it will then submit them, and it will then fail because I'm doing a demo. Right, I don't know why the session handling's failed, unless, hang on, probably because I messed around with something. Let's have a look at the... No, it's failed because I'm doing a demo. Right, basically this is a great way to test whether things work, and it clearly doesn't work at this moment. This is the first time it's failed for me for a long time, and definitely first time on stage. One thing it does, it actually has a set of diagnostics, and these diagnostics, because what we know is that if we have problems identifying a session, this is quite tricky, and it's quite tricky for people to work out why it's failed. So what we have is a set of diagnostics, and you'll see it doesn't actually have the real sites in. So we replace all of the sites with tokens, and we replace all of the values with tokens as well. So what you can do, and we've had a few people do this, is submit these diagnostics. They're text, you can copy them to clipboard, make sure they work for you, make sure they haven't got anything in there which is sensitive. Then you can raise an issue with us, send us an email or whatever, and we'll be able to look at them. Hopefully we'll then be able to work out why it's failed, and I will have a good look at this and work out why it's failed this time. And so this should make it very easy for you to work out whether we can actually handle authentication for your applications really easily, and if we can't, hopefully you'll be able to provide us with safe information which allows us to fix it. And so, picture the dialogue, and then they see it did actually work there, so I should have switched very quickly and you would have noticed. Other things that are coming soon, HTTP 2 support, so that is available and the week is live, and the authentication helper. So one thing it doesn't handle is cookie-based session management. We focused on other things because they've been kind of more used for modern web apps, but that will be coming fairly soon. And always trying to make it better too. Zap handling modern web applications better because they are a complete pain. And that's it. There's details of the website and the Twitter account. Who's got the first question?
Do you have a statistic about how many authenticated scans you see versus unauthenticated scans?
Okay, so the question was, do we have any statistics about authenticated scans versus unauthenticated scans? Yes, we do. And I haven't looked at them for a while, so that's one I want to go back and have a look at, and I will let you all know, because I'm interested in that as well. We collect a whole load of statistics. They are all, of course, safe ones, and we explain exactly what we do collect, but that is something I'd like to know as well.
With the better single-page app support, so my experience is the CrawlJack stuff does a pretty good job of actually exploring the application, but then it seems to kind of fall down a bit on the actual active scan side of things. It kind of loses anything that's dynamic in the page, because it tends to just take a snapshot of the DOM and send the request responses into the active scan engine. And we got plans to kind of work on that area, or?
Yes, definitely. So the question was about with single-page modern web applications, then CrawlJack is fairly effective, which is good to hear. But then the active scan is really kind of, working more on a snapshot of the website rather than the whole thing, which is not surprising because ZAP doesn't understand the client application. And that is something that we are definitely working on. And so what we're doing is there is actually a ZAP browser extension. So we are pulling information from the DOM. There are some challenges here because I've just found out that in Firefox you can't run extensions automatically which access all websites. You have to get a user to approve them every time, which makes things challenging for automation. And of course in Chrome, extensions don't work in headless mode. So we are working on it, but we are being challenged by the browser makers. But that is definitely part of it. We need SAP to understand what's going on the client. And one of the other things that we're using this browser extension for is we actually have a student working on part of Google Summer of Code for recording client-side things. So we'll then be able to record whatever's been going on the client. So if you want to reuse it for authentication or anything else, that's another way we might be able to pull stuff out of the DOM.
You said it works on the Raspberry Pi just. What's the recommended system for running it on?
Oh, I hate this question. So what is a recommended system for running ZAP? Well, it's not a Raspberry Pi. How long is your piece of string? If you've got a simple web app with 2 pages and a couple of parameters, the Raspberry Pi will probably work. If you've got a site like addons.mozilla.org, which is massive, and the first time I think it took 14 hours to scan, I think the Raspberry Pi won't cope. So it really does depend how your website is, and we don't get those kind of stats from users. I mean, we're getting some stats, we might be able to work things out, we might be able to work out what the average user is using for particular, but we haven't had time to look into that. So we try not to make any recommendations apart from more memory, more CPU, more disk, more everything is good.
Any more questions?
I think the question is, when's the beer time?
I think in that case the beer time is now. So the food and the beer are just being set up. I think they're ready for us out there. So big round of applause. Thank you, Simon. And if we could be back in here for 8 o'clock, I think we're aiming for, Paul. Yeah, 8 o'clock for the next talk for Anthony Harris.